Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to today's meeting. This is a public meeting and members of the public and press are permitted to report on these proceedings. Reporting includes filming, photography, making an audio recording, providing commentary on proceedings. Please note this meeting is recorded and streamed live. The recordings are published on the relevant meeting page of the Council's website. By choosing to attend this public meeting, you are deemed to have given your consent to being filmed or recorded and for any footage to be broadcast or published. If the alarm sounds, the premises must be evacuated immediately. Do not spend time collecting personal belongings. All emergency escape routes are assigned clearly. Once you have left the building, the assembly point is on the High Street opposite the Guildhall. Members and other speakers are reminded to use their microphone when speaking. Thank you. Item number 1, do we have any appointments for substitute?
Chair, the answer is no, we have no substitutes tonight.
Thank you. Item number 2, do we have any declarations of interest? Councillor Hodgson.
I'm an elected member of the BID, so I'll remain in the meeting.
Fine. Councillor Wachowski.
Under the agenda item 9, developing Worcester City Council's housing enabling strategy, the report provided for the committee includes the mention of my daytime employer. So just to bring it to everybody's attention. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you. That's fine. Okay. Item number 3, public participation.
Chair, yes, we did have a speaker registered to come and address the meeting tonight in relation to item 6, the new artificial grass pitch at Purdisar. He's not here at the moment. I have chased to see if he's coming to the meeting, but as I said, he's not here at the moment.
Okay, thanks, Julian. I mean, if he does turn up, we'll give him 5 minutes. Perfectly fine from my point of view. Moving on, item number 4, minutes of the meeting held on the 16th of March. If you can go through them page by page, please. We're happy to agree those minutes. Thank you, Stephen. Any other comments like anybody would like to raise? Fine, those minutes have been agreed. Thank you. Yeah, just before we move on to the next item, which is item number 5, can I first welcome you all to this committee? There's many on this committee that are new faces, and this committee performs a really vital function, and we value your opinion and debate and your constructive feedback, and I don't want any member to be left saying that we didn't debate any item as thoroughly as possible. That's our job, so please do raise any questions that you may have, even if you think they may not be relevant at this point of view. And I'd also like to take the opportunity to thank the previous chairman, James Stanley, whom I've worked alongside last year in a really amicable fashion to deliver the city's priorities, and it's a shame he's not alongside me to work with me again. Item number 5, then, please.
Thank you, Chair. I shall just introduce the purple flag item. Thank you very much for allowing us to bring this information to committee. I'll just sort of give you a Worcester City quick introduction to the purple flag and its relevance to us. So you'll see I've written a covering paper for you to for information, for really just for noting, and it's the intention of the Worcester as itself to apply for purple flag status. In respect to Worcester City Centre, this will be led by Worcester Business Improvement District, but supported very much by Worcester City Council and partners. But to note that as the city centre encompasses areas outside the designated BID, Business Improvement District, Worcester City will deliver the requirements of the purple flag application for those areas, so areas such as Lowesmoor and the Tithing. The benefits of purple flag, just quickly, are about our nighttime economy, increasing trade, to reduce perception of antisocial behaviour and opportunity for antisocial behaviour, and improve our nighttime offer across the city. So with that, I'd like to introduce Sam McCarthy, the CEO of Worcester Business Improvement District.
Thank you for having me. So yes, I want to sort of talk to you a little bit more about Purple Flag, and I've got a presentation to be able to show you. Yeah, that would be great, thank you. So as Warwick mentioned, Purple Flag is an accreditation demonstrating excellence in the evening and the nighttime economy. And this to us is so important to be able to bring this to the city, to be able to reassure the public on the safety of the city, to build confidence, and to make sure that we put Worcester on the map. So leading the accreditation will be the Worcester bid. We're supporting partners with City Council, West Mercia Police and Worcestershire Regulatory Services. So the process, we've had to select the boundary for Purple Flag. So the bid area is the main area, but as agreed with the team at Worcester City Council, we've brought in the Tithing and we've brought in Lowesmoor. We feel these areas are really key for the nighttime economy. There's lots of bars, lots of diversity. When we assessed those areas, they were really vibrant and really busy, right up till like 2 a.m., 3 a.m. So they're really key, and they all enter into that city centre area. So we've taken that snapshot. We've overdone a overnight assessment with a professional consultant who has looked at all areas, assessed us as if we were going through that accreditation, told us if we would pass and fail. I've got more to show you on that. It was really successful. Her words were, Worcester is really vibrant. You should be really pleased with what you've delivered. There's always areas for improvement. We know that, which is why we've got the Safer Streets bid in, the Future High Street. But where we're at now, we should be really proud. So entry will go in on the 24th of June. We're virtually there. We're about proofreading stage, so it will be coming back to the offices anytime soon, which will be a fun task on its own. But then we'll be submitting, and then we have official assessments in July and August time. It will be either a Friday or Saturday night. They'll give us a selection of dates where all partners come. We present to the assessors, and then they will go out and they will assess on 3-hour periods throughout the evening. So they'll do the evening 5 till 8, then they'll go on till 10 till 12, then they'll do later. They'll walk the same circuit, so they watch all areas throughout the evening on who's around, how it feels, does it feel safe. We had some great examples when they came out and assessed, and it was actually a race night, which was even great because it was so busy in the town. So they actually got to see how vibrant it was and how we managed the city that evening. So this is the boundary. As I said, it covers the bid area. So it goes over to the arena. It brings in the university. So we've got the safety of the students over in St. John's. It covers the race course because they have a real sort of, so many events going on throughout the year. That's really key. It goes up to the Tithing, into Lowesmoor, comes over city walls, and you come into the Diglis area as well. So really sort of key. It's covering the main hotspots where hotels, bars, restaurants are. So the assessment, we worked with Sarah Walker. She is a nighttime consultant for Purple Flag. And her wording was, it was a pleasure to actually do an assessment. It was one of the best assessments that she had done. She thinks Worcester is really vibrant, an amazing place, and that we should be really proud of it. We have so many diverse businesses, and I think what she was really impressed about was the number of independent businesses we actually had in the city, which really stands out to her. And you could really see the effort they were putting into. And that's just a snapshot of our city in the evening. And it looks amazing. So no wonder she got that vibe from us. The businesses really go out by putting lighting out there as well to make it feel safer on their premises. Most businesses are lit till about 2 in the morning, which yet again adds to that environment, that atmosphere. It makes you feel safer. When we walked down New Street and Friar Street, at the time it was all the lampshades out when we assessed, people were out there as if it was a party. It had such a good atmosphere. You felt safe standing in the streets. And that's something so simple, like a bit of festoon, made people feel and brought that footfall to that area. And then our venues. This was taken on a Friday night 2 weeks ago. Our venues were packed. People were eating, drinking, having a good time. And what the nighttime consultant mentioned was the variety and how many different people out. You saw families, you saw older generation going to the theatres, people going to the cinema. You had groups of guys on stag do's. There was all sorts. The nighttime economy wasn't just student-based. It had a huge diversity, and that really shone for us. So our timeline, I'm really sorry, it's quite small on the screen, but so in February, we set up the steering group. In March, we went through the initial consultation with the assessment. And through the last few months, we've been putting together the submission with the support of Worcester City Council, West Mercia Police and Worcester Regs. So we're getting to, as I said, final stages to be able to submit in June. Then we will go through the assessment, and hopefully in September, we will find out that we have awarded it and we'll be able to paint the city purple and really celebrate our venue and our safe place. So support we've done as part of the accreditation is we've put the businesses through Best Bar None. This is accreditation supported by the Home Office for licensed venues. It basically checks that they have all their foundations in place. It gives us a reason to shout that venues are safe. They've got everything they should have in place to ensure that we have a really good nighttime economy and that when you come out in Worcester, you've got nothing to worry about. Business training. So far since February, we've put 262 delegates through courses. This has been first aid, AED, health and safety, personal license. We've done conflict training and physical intervention. Catastrophic bleed, we brought that in when the knife angel came in. We thought that was a great message. You know, you can't prevent knife crime all the time, but can we teach people what to do if something happens? We've put bleed out kits into all the licensed venues, and we've also put 5 AED kits into the licensed venues. So that was one thing we noticed on community safety was a lot of our AED kits were in the daytime economy. You had a couple of areas that went 24/7. So what happens with the nighttime economy? So we've put 5 AEDs out into businesses that are open till 4 a.m. in the morning that are accessible to be able to try and expand that. We've also, as I mentioned, put bleed out kits. These are all window stickers that are into the venues so that it is highlighted so people know where they are. And the other, we're working with venues on who to be a safe place, somewhere you can go. Similar to Ask Angela, but it could be anything. You just need a taxi, you need someone to sit with you, you need to avoid someone. There's places that are open doors that you don't need to feel you have to buy anything or be put on the spot. And then community safety. So this is our next steps. This is putting external AEDs into the city to ensure that they are accessible 24/7 to the public and to make sure that we are as safe as we possibly can. And then, so the support required, Warwick had already sort of mentioned, really it's officer support from City Council, which we've had so much of already, and we're really grateful for everything. And as we get closer to September time, if we're awarded from the councillors, what we would really like is your support with the media to make sure that we're seen as a partnership and to make sure that we really celebrate it and get this news story out to the public as much as we possibly can. And to paint the city purple. So we would like to have a celebration. We'd like to do an awards night. We'd like the Guildhall to be lit up purple, and we'd like to fly the flag over the Guildhall to sort of demonstrate this is what we've managed to achieve. And then the next steps. So if we are lucky to receive Purple Flag in September, we will then have to take it through a renewal process the following year. It's an interim renewal, so it shouldn't be as challenging as this one. And then in 2024, we would go for full renewal again of the process, which goes into more depth. But our aim is to continue this and to make sure that we still have Purple Flag for as many years as the bidder is around. So, and that's my presentation. So, any questions?
Thank you, Sam. Really appreciate you spending your time with us and explaining this wonderful report to us. I'll open it out to the floor. I'll take Councillor Stephen Hodgson first.
Okay, my question is a simple one. First of all, a remark is, I think the fact that we do get this, it is a kudos for our city. The fact there's all these criteria that's being laid down, it will encourage us to meet these standards and ideally exceed them better. But the question I have is, how many other cities and towns have been awarded this purple flag status? And can you give any examples of where it has made a difference?
So there's 70 cities that have gone through at the moment. Canterbury is the longest standing one. They've had it for 10 years awarded now. And they've obviously got quite a good support system on the policing department, and they have crime figures reduced and different things. They've been able to get extra grants for their support work with that because of having purple flag status. Liverpool is another great example, and Liverpool's actually used as a template for us to follow when they go out for purple flag candidates because of how successful they have been. There are areas that have failed purple flag, and that's normally down to the partnership. We've been warned that it's more that there's not that great strength, but that's something I'm not worried about with Worcester at all, because we do have a really strong partnership with all our multi-agencies.
Councillor Teixeira.
Thank you. So on the safety issue and your partnership with the police, I was just wondering whether there might be a need for any more, or how many currently in the city centre there are cameras that are working, and whether there's any need to look at that at all.
So camera-wise, we're pretty well covered in the city centre, to be honest, and we're connected through CityNet Radio with CCTV and with the police teams. The police hold 10 of our CityNet radios. We've been looking at different areas and working with, obviously, Crown Gate Shopping Centre on where we could enhance areas that have cameras but may be obstructed due to building work at the moment. But, I mean, the cameras went in pretty recent, and they do have a really strong coverage. That wasn't something the assessor picked up. We actually had an example on the night where we had to radio through because of some antisocial behaviour. The assessor got to watch the cameras, link from our radios, pick them up, and the cameras moved and followed them all around. So it was actually really good for them to see how strong our system is in the city.
Just a follow-up question from that. So does CCTV form part of the assessment for Purple Bid?
Yes, CCTV will be part of it. They do require to see the CCTV office on the night. So it could either be the one in Pershore, or it could be the university CCTV room. But they just want to see how that works. They'll also attend like a late night police briefing, and they'll get to see how the radio system works as well.
Thank you. Councillor Lawrenson.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for the presentation. I have 3 questions. I just want to preface those with a comment. The colour purple happens to be the same colour as the Chocolate Festival from 2013. The first question is, how much officer time would be required in terms of City Council officers to support this bid? Second question is, how will premises in the Tithing and Lowersmoor be convinced to support this scheme? And related to that second question, what are the actual tangible benefits of adopting this scheme? If I was a business owner, I'd want to know, well, what's in it for me? So what's in it for the businesses? Officer time.
So officer time, the majority of the work's been done recently. I know that Tom shared it out across the whole team, so that was just basically going through what we needed to do to meet the minimum requirements sort of thing. So I'm not too sure if you want to add on that one.
Yeah, I mean, it's not taken huge amounts of time. The majority of the work has been done by Worcester Bid. I think a lot of the stuff that came out as recommendations were things that we needed to be done, or sort of things that we could just pick up our sort of day-to-day work. So nothing significant that we couldn't absorb within existing.
I'm going to go to your business one first because it will lead into loads more quite nicely. So for the businesses, to be able to have Purple Flag status will encourage people to come to the city. It demonstrates we are a safe place, so it encourages students to pick the university as their choice, families to come and invest and live here, and potential businesses to invest as well. So it is a high status to be able to say, yes, we are a safe nighttime economy, and this is why if you're picking where to go, you should go to Worcester instead of Birmingham or Cheltenham for your night out. We're the place to go. And leading that on from the way the businesses see that, for Lowesmore and the tithing, yes, they're not in the bid area, but what we have said, we're partners with the City Council for Best Bar None. We were willing to open that scheme up for any venues to go through the Best Bar None accreditation as well, so that they have that status. They can have that plaque to say they've been assessed and they are Best Bar None accredited. That will give them the wow factor as well, and the bragging rights to be able to say, we're a safe venue, you should pick us.
Yeah, go on, Councillor Lawrence.
Thank you for your answers. Try not to put this in a flippant way. I work at the university, so they're an interest there. If I was a student and deliberating over whether to go for a pint in Worcester or Birmingham, whether Worcester's a Purple Flag city would not swing it for me. I'd go where the nearest bars are. I wouldn't go somewhere based on the fact that that place is a Purple Flag place. I would go to that place if I knew what concrete difference it had made to that particular city. So, for example, Purple Flag led to 2 more pubs opening up. And then, you know, just being Purple Flag, it wouldn't really swing my decision making. So, sort of coming back to my question about sort of actual tangible benefits, not just for people going to these places for a night out, but also for the businesses who we're trying to involve in the scheme. I'd want to know what concrete difference the scheme is making.
Not only the safety, Purple Flag measures broad appeal and place. So as part of the application, we've put in the diversity of businesses. The fact that we have so many different restaurants, you can eat Italian, you've got French, you've got Singapore, Chinese, you've got all different options. You can go to a Mexican bar for tequila flight boards, or you can go to a craft ale bar. We've got new micro pubs. There's different things. So it monitors everything like that. It looks at the fact the Slug and Lettuce is in a church. That's really different. Actually, when she saw it, the nighttime assessor, she was like, oh, and she took a picture because it was different and unusual to be able to see that. And yeah, I think as a student, you probably, like you said, you're not going to pick over Purple Flag, but as a parent, if you have any say on where your student's going to come, and as a mum myself, I'd want to know that I'm sending my child to a safe city and that they don't have high crime rates and that they have been recognised nationally as a safe city to be in and that they've met every criteria. They also look at, have we gone above and beyond? There are awards nights in London, so for cities that have gone above and beyond, they're the ones that are going to be recognised nationally for this, and that will give us the real credit that we deserve as a city.
Yeah, thanks, Sam. That's a really helpful explanation. And I mean, we have gold standards in our car parks, we have gold standards in our restaurants, we have food hygiene ratings, we have, you know, this is another gold standard for something to achieve about and something to shout about. It gives that peace of mind for visitors and parents alike. I mean, I think the case you're mentioning in terms of students, it may be that they just don't know about Purple Flag and the accreditations and the stringent measures that need to go with it. Do you have any more speakers on this item? Take Councillor Mackay, then I'll take you, Chair.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. One of the partners is Worcester Regulatory Services, and one of the things when you mentioned about parents seeing their children go to different towns and such like is the confidence and the abilities that they have in the door staff. Just wondering, in relation to Worcester Regulatory Services, I believe they do the checks in relation to SIA accreditations and such like. Is that an ongoing thing because door staff change over regularly? You know, get some confirmation that that's the case and we're not sort of letting it go for any length of time. Thank you.
So Worcesterbird actually have a really good relationship with all the door staff. So yes, we do checks, but we also go out on evening visits with the licensing officer from West Mercia Police and with Anne Nichols from the youth safety team in Worcester City Council. They check all the licensing, we check the door staff. We do this on a monthly basis, but we've also recognised the need for training for the security teams as well. They are the face of the businesses. If they do something wrong, that impacts on that licensed venue. So we have brought in WAVE training, which has been adopted by the Met Police. They are the ones that put this together. WAVE training basically shows you a scenario, and then it shows you the slightest thing somebody could have made different. It could have been that waitress, it could have been a member of staff, it could have been the door staff, that could have stopped that person from having a serious incident. So we're putting 50 businesses through it during July, and there'll be another session in August as well. We have opened it to all security teams and door staff as the first ones coming through, because as I said, they're the ones that have that impact on that night. They can stop that girl going out alone. They can make sure that person who's lay on the street gets into the taxi, or find somebody, that nobody is vulnerable. And that comes back to the SIA checks, is making sure that they have gone through it all, they have their first aid, they're regularly refreshed, and that's why Worcester Bid have that constant engagement with the main operators for the door staff.
Thank you, Chair. I think that's very reassuring.
Thank you, Councillor Sarah.
As a woman, I would definitely see a purple flag in anywhere I was going out, especially if I was going out with myself anywhere, cinema.
Thank you. Councillor Lucy Hodgson.
I just want to say really a big thank you. It's brought everybody together. It's brought the bid, the City Council, the police, regulatory services, and it's brought them all together, and it's really been worthwhile, the work. And I know that some of the businesses as well have tweeted on Twitter and everything how well it's been working and that sort of thing. So I just want to go thank you really, because it's a lot of hard work, but my goodness, it's worth it.
Thank you, Councillor Lamb.
Yeah, coming back to something you said earlier on, you said that obviously there's 70 cities which have got this. Can you give me an example of a city that might have had it and then lost it? Because I can imagine it's a very exciting opportunity. It's very good for the city, but I can imagine it then places a sort of duty of responsibility of the city to maintain that standard. And I can imagine that might then shape, for example, some decisions that might be made by the licensing committee about whether there are empty shops or empty venues, what you actually put in there. So are there any examples of where cities have lost this? And what was the main reason? I mean, you said there was sometimes an issue about partnership, but can you give me a sort of solid example? Because clearly I think it's a great opportunity, and it certainly influenced my going out in Worcester rather than anywhere else. But I think it does place that sort of onus on us to maintain that high standard, which is a good thing, actually.
I actually don't know an example to be able to give you. They don't actually publicise this. So I don't think anyone would say, I've got purple flag and I lost it the next year, because, yeah, that's not going to look great. But I can obviously do a bit of research on that and come back to you with a bit more. But, yeah, I think we're one of these cities that we do want to strive to do better each year. And we've done the main hard work, because I think the hardest work is knowing how to put that application through. Once we've done it once, it's refreshing it, and as part of the application, we have to show our current standard, recent progress, and future commitments. So our future commitments is huge, because we've just received all this funding for these great opportunities with the Safer Streets bid, with all the projects that are going on. So when they come back in 2024, the city's going to look very different, and they're going to see that. So when we did that assessment, we were showing her areas, and we were like, but this is how it looks, this is the plan, this is the phase, this is the timeline. And they were really pleased to see that, because that shows that we're a moving city constantly.
Follow-up questions to that. Is there, how do I put this? Is there anything that would count against the bid? Because one person's vibrancy, sometimes, well, you know, I mean, we've had situations in Worcester where, for example, the site next to, the old supermarket site next to McDonald's, for example, you know, there was an attempt to turn that into a gin bar. And that was turned down by licensing because it was felt that it could lead to antisocial behaviour. And I'm just thinking, are there things that you might think, well, let's put this on because it adds to the vibrancy and it fills an empty shop, which but might be viewed negatively, for example. I suppose, if I'm being brutally honest, you know, if you think about licensing has to make decisions about venues of adult entertainment, you put along those lines. Now, you know, I personally, you know, would think that would look negatively, to be honest with you, especially if we're trying to encourage, you know, safety for women, you know, sort of that kind of issue. Are there things that you might think, well, that might count against a bit?
Doesn't know, because in Birmingham you have that, you know, we've got it in loads more. It's entertainment at the end of the day, and if we don't cater for it, then we're probably going to have more problems on our streets, and that's the way to think of it. If we provide everything that people want, we keep our city and our local economy with people in spending their money instead of going to Birmingham, which you know have that. And I think it's down to, yeah, again, going back to the partnership, we have a really strong police team out there. The night we assessed, there were 5 police vans around. It was Cheltenham Racers. It was busy. But the police were patrolling, they were visible on foot and in vehicle. You felt safe, as you said, you'd like Purple Flag because of feeling like, woman, I'm a right wuss walking home. I'd be like, oh God, but to know I've got that safety, that does make me feel better.
Okay, thanks. We've got sufficient time to discuss that. I think we've made some really good points. I'll sum up and then we'll go forward with the recommendations. I mean, I think when we originally started this process, or probably a number of years ago, I think I remember the leads on there where this process kind of started. So I'm glad it's finally kind of got here, and I thank you for your enthusiasm and, you know, sharing with us the benefits that it brings. I mean, there's a couple of stark realities I think we need to bear in mind when bearing this. I mean, obviously, the majority of this Purple Flag scheme falls in the Cathedral ward. And over the past year, there have been some alarming statistics in terms of the amount of incidents that we've had around the city centre. Of the nearly 5,000 reports of crimes within the city centre, 3,000 of them have been either antisocial behaviour or sexual related, and of those 3,000, 1,590 around sexual violence. So, I mean, the vast majority of these were recorded in the city centre, and I suspect around the night. Since the kind of the Sarah Everard case and the various pots of funding that we've got, we're making real address that situation. That's why I think this report in so many ways will help address some of those issues and the safety for that nighttime economy. Safe in well-lit, clean, hygienic environments where they can choose their to enjoy their evening, knowing full well that venues have been thoroughly vetted and security staff, etc. And even their journeys home, you know, are by appropriate people. So, I mean, I really welcome what the bid has gone out of their way to include other areas, especially tithing, because the Lowesmoor, which is our key arterial routes for our revellers and our people that come into the city, stop off, enjoy either on the way or the way out. You know, I think there's still issue about visibility of police. I think it's really key that we, ladies' night or a racing night is a bit of an exception because you kind of expect more volume in there and people that have travelled up. So, but on a regular night, are there as many police officers? Can we have that reassurance from the police that they maintain that level of assurance? So that was one thing. Apart from that, really pleased that you're going for it, and hopefully that we can all actually participate in some way or way or form in addressing this. And one final thing is the all bar none system is a really good system. Whether it can translate into a rating system for each venue, which will give us, which we can publicly share with with our food standards rating. It is to just make that choice a little bit easier for people that wish to go out. So the item is for recommending 1.1 and 1.2. Can I have a show of hands of all those in favour, please? Agreed? Thank you, Sam. Okay. Item number 6, provision of a new artificial grass pitch at Purdyswell. Alan?
Thank you, Chair. I'd just like to start off by just putting some kind of background context to the paper, which is to just kind of remind members that a previous report was brought before this committee back in January 2020, which was the content of the local football facility plan. And that plan, which was carried out by a kind of independent consultancy, identified a number of potential projects in the city. And the number one project within that plan was a location at Purdyswell Leisure Centre for the provision of new pitch. And since that time, a further piece of work has been done to update the playing pitch and outdoor sports strategy. And that piece of work was completed in December of 2021 and identified a shortfall of 3G. That's third generation, so artificial pitches within the city. One of those locations was Purdyswell Leisure Centre. Another was a conversion of an existing pitch from sand-based to 3G at the university, and the other one was at Nunnery Wood Sports Complex, which again was a conversion. So Purdyswell Leisure Centre was the only location that was identified for the installation of an actual new facility. And part of the reason for that was that previously working with the Football Foundation, back in 2006, the City Council were successful in obtaining some funding for the provision of a changing room facility and also a number of outdoor grass pitches. So from the point of view of the Football Foundation, that represented an ideal location for the installation of a new pitch. So we met with the Football Foundation back in April, and the outcome of that was that in order for us to be able to access their framework now and take this to the next stage, they need to see a kind of detailed business case. And the timing of this is interesting because previously grants from the Football Foundation have provided funding for up to 50%. And we're now in a position whereby, for the first time, their new funding stream, which starts from July, actually provides funding of up to 75% of projects. So the current scheme at Purdyswell has been estimated to cost in the region of about £800,000. So we're looking at potentially a contribution from the Football Foundation of £600,000 towards those costs. That in itself has obviously improved the business case position, because even previously, when it was done on a 50% contribution, it was very viable. And of course, the additional contribution has just made that scheme even more financially viable than it was previously. So we're in a position now whereby we're looking to just start that piece of work, which allows us to access the support from the Football Foundation, who in turn have also got the support of the local football association as well. Some of you may know that they, in previous times, have installed a similar type of facility up at Claines Lane. The full-size pitch there, which is, if you know it, that's the type of facility that we're kind of looking at in terms of the provision at Purdyswell Leisure Centre. In terms of booking arrangements, we would look to utilise Freedom Leisure as their existing leisure operator to oversee the booking arrangements and an amendment in that kind of existing management fee. And one of the requirements within the funding will be that any surplus income generated has to be ring-fenced and reinvested for the future upkeep of that facility, both in terms of the ongoing maintenance and the future re-provision of the surface. And of course, with the existing facilities that already exist in terms of changing cafe facilities, toilets, car parking, the infrastructure is already in place to allow a facility like that to be installed without the need for those additional facilities and those costs associated. Everything, thank you. If there's any questions.
I'll open this out to the floor. I'll Councillor Lawrenson first.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Alan, for the presentation. You're not going to like what I'm about to say. So they're comments more than questions. I caught wind of this from a resident, actually, and then I found out a Worcester News article which would say it'd be somewhat ironic for local councillors to agree this location, given the opposition to the Worcester City Supporters Trust's bid to build a 4,300-seater stadium. And I take that point. The resident who made me aware of this, because I'm a new member to this committee, so this is, I'm out of the loop here, my first committee's committee meeting, I'm playing catch up. And the resident said, surely in this economic climate we find ourselves in, there are better things to spend the money on. I've got a lot of sympathy with that. We're talking about £200,000. I presume to recommend to full council to then spend. Way before I became a member of this committee, I actually met with a representative from Tudor Grange Academy and the manager of Purdeswell Colts Football Club, both of whom said that they want a 3G pitch to be in Tudor Grange because it would suit the people playing football. And that pitch would be available to the public at certain times in the day. And I'm wondering whether, here's the question, I'm wondering whether that Tudor Grange is the location that is somewhat mysteriously referred to in point 4.6. So at 4.6 in this paper, it refers to a second option, and it says if this £200,000 bid is not successful, then we will look at a second option. So the question is, amongst all those comments, is the second option Tudor Grange Academy? Because if it is, they've done a lot of work on having a 3G pitch, and that would be at no cost to this council. I think that would be a tremendously popular move given the cost of living crisis that a lot of people are in. And I understand that the visiting figures for Purdeswell Leisure Centre are down on pre-COVID levels, and I'd suspect that a lot of that is down to the fact that people have less money to spend on leisure. So if there is a nearby location, 4.6, at no cost to this council, I would urge this committee to support that. This is £200,000 when, a lot of people are struggling. So unless people convince me tonight, I'm not going to be in favour of it, obviously. So can you give me any assurances at all about the cost that we're talking about here? And can you give me any assurances about whether that Tudor Grange site is actually viable and whether it is actually the one that's been referred to, albeit not by name?
Yes, you are correct that Tudor Grange is the alternative site. In terms of existing demand, interestingly, Worcester City Youth, all of their current boys, girls and youth teams play their match fixtures on the grass pitches at Purdeswell, but they find it incredibly difficult to access appropriate training accommodation. In fact, to the point where they currently have to utilise the facilities at 6 different venues, 4 within the city and 2 outside of the boundary, in order to meet their current demand. And obviously what we're looking to do at Purdeswell is create more of a football hub, really, where both matchday fixtures and training requirements can be met. And that also includes provision for Purdeswell Colts, who play their current grass pitch fixtures on Bilford Road corner, and again struggle to kind of find training accommodation So it allows us to provide for local clubs, but also it's a public access facility as well. Now, that facility is projected to make a surplus on income every year, albeit obviously that needs to be reinvested in the upkeep and the re-provision of the facility, but we're talking about a facility for the long term. I mean, normally a facility like that, in terms of lifespan, you would expect to last for between 10 and 12 years at the top level. But with the right type of investment, with that surplus income, that facility can continue to provide for the residents of the city for not just years, but decades to come once it's been installed. So yeah, I think that from that point of view, the Football Foundation and the FA view the facility and the location to be ideal because of all the existing infrastructure. So you've got a public facility that's already open for extensive hours, 7 days a week. You have the car parking, you have the cafe services, you have the change in the toilet facilities, you have the first aid, all of that. And I think the concern with the school site is that it causes a problem from the point of view of opening up a school site out of school hours. Clearly, allowing public access during school hours is a problem from a safeguarding point of view, so that's very unlikely anyway, but therefore the times that they could make it publicly accessible is outside the times when the school would normally be open, and therefore the risk is that you've then got people wandering around the site, not being able to access toilets and, you know, the appropriate facilities, car parking again, you know, maybe an issue with local residential streets and that. So I think that's why, you know, ultimately as well has been identified in both the local football facilities plan and the playing pitch strategy as by far the most appropriate location.
Yeah, go on. Thank you, Chair. Just to make a couple of points to add to Alan's. The concerns, potential concerns from residents, you know, this is a very different facility to what was being proposed as part of a 5,000-seater stadium. This is an artificial pitch for training that will be sort of enclosed, you know, in a cage in effect. So we're not talking about an all sort of seater stadium or hard standing for fans. This is a training facility. Alan's mentioned the under provision within the city, and one of the things that's been impressed on me, and I've been taken in by certainly, is the fact that when you travel around England, most flagship leisure centres across the UK, they have an artificial pitch provision. We don't in Worcester. Our flagship leisure centre in Perth as well is devoid of that. So for us, from an officer point of view, it's further development of what is our, you know, our sort of, you know, shining light really in terms of leisure provision. And the other thing, you know, not to underplay it, is that, you know, we have an ever increasing role in health and well-being and public health. So again, us having direct control over a facility and opening that up to community use of all ranges from all communities is really important to us from a health and well-being point of view as well.
Yeah, just one final point, Neil, on that is also that there's currently 6 grass football pitches provided at Perth as well, which the council invested in extensively a few years back to bring them up to a good standard. And the demand on those pitches is very high. Again, the findings within the playing pitch strategy are that, you know, in terms of grass pitch provision, we struggle because the boundaries of the city are very tight. So at times we're reliant on having to drop back onto pitches like Pitchcroft, with all the associated concerns during the winter, during the playing season, of the risk of flooding and whatever. So of course we lose those pitches quite often. And what this allows us to do, because of the standard that it meets in terms of the criteria, it allows us to be able to play match day fixtures at weekends, which are predominantly a quieter period in terms of artificial pitch use, because a lot of the grass pitches are being used. It allows us to take some of those grass pitches out, rest them, play those match fixtures on the artificial surface, and make sure that those 6 existing grass pitches are retained to a really good standard rather than being overused because of the demand in the city not being kind of met.
Take Shane, then We've got Councillor Cleary.
Thank you, Chair. Just on the point, just to cover the cost issue. So the request is for council to agree to an increase in the capital programme of £200,000. But the assessments that we've done in terms of the income that will be generated include the life cycle costs, so they include the costs of borrowing. So in the event that we borrow, the income we generate from the pitch will be sufficient to cover the cost of borrowing. So it's in effect cost neutral to the council. Obviously, there's a risk in the event that the income isn't generated, isn't sufficient to cover those costs. But as things stand, the business case suggests that it won't cost.
We'll take Councillor Cleary next, please.
I'll start off. I think it's a great idea. I've got a query about something that's in 5.8, where it says about the turn up and play and free of charge aspect of the community facilities, and it confused me a bit. That gave me the indication that it was going to be open for people to just wander up and play. No, I mean, because I've got the assumption it's going to be booked through Freedom Leisure. But you can just clarify that, that'd be great.
Yeah, the intention would for the bookings to be coordinated through Freedom Leisure, so it would be a kind of paid for hired facility. However, the intention of Freedom Leisure as their operators is to, with the existing 2 or 5-a-side pitches, be able to also provide some free of charge sessions through their active communities team. Or what they actually find is that by providing sessions for a minimal charge, so they've recently been doing some work where they charge a session, and they've been attracting quite a number of local youth that session, because they find that by putting a small charge against it, they do a bit more because it isn't free, making a contribution. And what they're quite keen to do is to work with local schools whereby they already do some work in areas of deprivation around free swimming. What they're keen to do is to utilise that opportunity, dovetail that in with the football. So in other words, at the end of the school day, local school children could kind of come down, do a football session, have a swim, and then go home for the thing. So that it's a facility that's accessible to all parts of the community, not just clubs that can afford to play on it.
Councillor Lucy Hodgson. Sorry, Stephen. Yeah.
Thank you, yes. Found this quite interesting, this paper. I'm pleased on your options you are going to place it where it is and not take away those smaller pitches and that. As Mayor early this year, I went to walking football session and that. Shows how those smaller pitches are used by actually the grassroots of the grassroots. And that. I do believe that these sort of pitches are getting more and more important as land is getting more and more scarce. We need to be able to have pitches that can be used far more intensively in that. That is why, for example, if you build a modern secondary school, not like my old secondary school where we had acres and acres of playing field, just quite simply do that. So you do have to have pitches like this, which are very, very. Also, unless you've got floodlighting on here, I take it these will obviously be modern LED floodlight that are far more economical in terms of running, and also, as you say, modern floodlights are far better in terms of the light spill and that sort of thing. Obviously, I think either being concerned by residents with games happening in the evening, I think really that is really the big difference with this and this, but also with local leagues playing their Sunday league matches, particularly in the winter when games get put back, you get fixture backlogs and that. I can see again you are addressing that. I mean, obviously my question is obviously regarding the income streams on this. You know, are you happy that the income stream will actually maintain the facility the standard need to be? Also, this £90,000, I believe, projected annual income. What sort of criteria are you based on? Because I sort of did a rough fact job And if you paid about £150 for, say, a 90-minute match, what the going rate is for about that sort of rate, I guess you must have a different rate for a floodlit game and a non-floodlit game. What sort of intensive use would you need to generate that £90,000 worth of income?
Yeah, interestingly enough, the projections have been based on very local data. So as an example, for those of you that know the two fairly small pitches at the rear of St John's Sports Centre, which were installed back in 2008. And there's an example of two pitches that currently generate in the region of about £88,000 to £90,000 a year in income. And the type of facility that we're talking about installing at Purdyswell is far in advance of that in terms of quality and in terms of capacity. So we think we've been, quite realistic. We've used data from Wood as another example, and also from other facilities, and we think we've been fairly conservative with those estimates. So yeah, we're very confident in that respect. In terms of fees, again, obviously that's we're yet to get to the point of agreeing those, but you would probably be looking in the region of around £70 to £80 an hour to hire for a club. But of course, if you may have 30 people taking part in that training session. So again, that makes that still fairly cheap to do. And we would, as a result of the community use agreement that the council has with Plains Lane, with the football club up there, obviously we look to make sure that the pricing policy is fairly consistent with what already kind of exists up there. Because again, we want to work together with local partners rather than being in direct competition in that respect.
Let Sarah first.
So I do get your points, cost of living. I'm on the task force about that. However, I think you should always remember there's more to life than just to live. And if you're thinking about providing a facility that is available to youths, say in Warndon, for example, there's no other facility I know of. And if the alternative is that there isn't such access, then they're going to continue going onto school roofs and trashing those instead. And that gives a cost of its own, doesn't it? So I think, yes, we have a cost of living crisis coming, but quality of life and giving people better buy into their community is always going to be important as well. It seems to me it is an affordable way to try to do that. The other thing on the school thing, I don't think that's going to be the suitable alternative, only because of access. Otherwise, I think it would have been good, but better for those.
Thanks, Councillor De Sarah. Usually we address the chair through the chair. Councillor Wachowski.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Alan, for introducing this report. I think I've got three queries. So in terms of the size of the proposed 3G pitch, I'm a beneficiary. Up until recently, I was a beneficiary of the 3G pitches behind the St John's Leisure Centre. I'm a very slow but still keen fullback. What size are we talking about? Because I got a little bit confused when you said fixtures being played on that pitch and then pitches being used for training purposes only. We're talking about two different propositions here, are we? Or am I losing something in the narrative there? And I've got quick point on the environmental impact. You did mention that, was it 12 years lifespan, more or less? So what about as in natural environment? There is light pollution mentioned there, but what about the disposal of the material? Any considerations, any concerns around that? So that's my question number 2. And then the final one around the financial side of things. The Football Foundation is entering its 3-year cycle. In terms of the timing, when we are committing £200,000, can we afford to wait, bearing in mind what my colleague mentioned about the cost of living crisis? Thank you.
Just before you address those, Alan, I think Councillor Cleary did raise a point just before the meeting here in terms of the exact location of the pitches. Do we have a map that you can show?
We don't have a map to hand, but it's essentially, for those that know the site, between the leisure centre building, there's a grassed area between there and the grass football pitches. So it's essentially, as you look at the building, it's at the back, at the rear. So where you've got the existing two small five-a-side pitches here, it's at the back of the building. So it's the opposite end to the swimming pool, essentially. So if you think about where the swimming pool's located, it's the opposite end of the building, because that's where the Football Foundation changing block was built back in 2006, which naturally serves the grass pitches anyway, and will also serve that surface at the same time.
Just to add to Piotrowski's point, there's recent media articles regarding the mis-selling of AstroTurf pitches as environmentally friendly. Piotrowski was making the types of pitch that we're going to use and how we're going to dispose of them.
Yeah, I mean, in respect of the environmental aspects, as you can imagine, you know, developments are being made all the time in the creation of these services. So at the moment we're at 3G. There are kind of future concepts at the moment that are out there around kind of 4G and even 5G. Those products haven't been accredited by the appropriate bodies at this stage. So, you know, 3G is the accredited product at this point. But clearly the manufacturers are constantly looking at ways in which they can make these products more environmentally friendly. So from the infill that is used, whether that's 3G, whether that's sand dressed, to the actual surface itself, you know, I will need to look into more detail as to exactly what they're currently doing in terms of the disposal, because of course at this stage we haven't got an appointed contractor because we're not that far down the process. But what we would look to do in terms of the specification is to build that in as one of those requirements as part of the procurement. Yeah. Okay. Okay. In terms of the size, it's essentially a full-size pitch. So if you imagine the size of a normal grass pitch, it's replicating that plus the 3-metre runoff space that's required from a safety point of view around the perimeter as well. So it would essentially start from and take up probably 3/4 of that space at the side of the building there.
Yeah, and just in terms of the last point around the timing, I think Alan may want to comment on the back of me, but I think this really is about accessing the pathway and the support from the Football Foundation. They are ready and waiting for us to benefit from that. So if we don't get in, that will knock us back in the process, so to speak. So we've got the ability to access that support now and take this on to a detailed business design case stage. If we don't access it at the moment, there is no guarantee that we'll be able to access that level of support over the next few months, or beyond, actually.
Thanks, Councillor Dissert and then Councillor Cleary.
Community trust, it's not a set amount. So if people did want to raise money for charity, they could do, and all the money would go to charity. And it's more focused on people doing sport rather than it being a business. So I'm in favour with that. Thank you, Chair.
Cleary?
Yeah, just a quick question, Chair, about the size of the pitch. I mean, I used to play a lot of football on these sorts of pitches, and we would never train on a whole of one of these pitches. So there'd be probably 2 or 3, maybe 4 groups, all individually hired portions of the pitch. Is that how it's going to work? That's obviously more cost effective than someone.
That's absolutely indeed how it would operate, yeah.
Thank you. Do we have Councillor Ali?
I'm in favour of this. as it will give opportunities to different communities, youth, different schools. If we talk about living costs, there are a lot of other stuff we can do. If we don't put our youth in that road for play, that means that we are diverting into different direction, which can be costly and can be going to the dangerous side. So I'm in fully favour of that.
Thank you. I don't think there's any more speakers. I'll sum up and then we'll go to the vote. Yep, Councillor New. Sorry, Alan.
Yeah, I just wanted, I suppose in summing up, I just wanted to kind of give you a local example of a facility. Kidderminster, the new leisure centre that was built over there, that is built actually in and around a local housing estate, was a similar facility to Purdyswell in terms of the 25-metre swimming pool, gym, training facilities and everything. But interestingly, they've actually got 7 artificial football pitches at the rear of the facility. 7 pitches. A good local example.
Okay, I'm just going to quickly sum up. I think we've had a really good debate and some really different arguments regarding it, regarding the life cycle costs and locations, etc. I think the original Football Foundation playing pitch strategy started in 2018, and although I was kind of a little bit disappointed that the focus really was on Purdyswell rather than Pitchcroft or Diglis or other sites around the city, it kind of makes sense within the business case here in terms of what we're doing. I recognise some of the cost of living crisis really relevant here, but I do recognise when a good deal when we see one, and the amount of investment we're putting in, and the fact that the Football Foundation are putting 600,000 of that 800,000 in, seems to me that it's a really great opportunity to increase our football provision, and the fact that it's in the public sector, it opens up a lot more opportunities and access to groups that would never have had it before, including those that we've mentioned before in terms of lowering the cost and accessibility. So, rather than it being in a school setting, Purdyswell is becoming a hub for sports, and why wouldn't we want the best facilities in there? And if our premier sports centre leisure facility hasn't got a full-size football pitch, then we really are lacking behind the times, and it's a really good opportunity, I think, for us to make the most of what's on offer here. So what I'll do then, we'll go through the recommendations one by one. So we'll take them. Item 1.1 approves the progression of the business case and detailed design for a multi-use artificial grass pitch at Purdyswell. All those in favour, please. Thank you. And any against? 1. And any abstentions? We have 1 abstention and okay, and 1 against you. Item 1.2, recommend to the Council in principle capital allocation of £200,000 that is required to unlock specialist support from the Football Foundation to facilitate the development of a business case and detailed design. All those in favour, please. Do we have any against? 1 against, and any abstentions? 1 abstention. Thank you. 1.3, to note that the Council would be required to pay costs of up to £10,000 should the Football Foundation or the Council decide the project is no longer viable as part of the application process. All those in favour, please. Thank you. Thank you. Okay, item number 7, artificial municipal cricket wicket. Alan?
Thank you, Chair. This is just an information paper, really, just to make, I'm sure many of the members are aware of the fact that there was an allocation in the budget setting process of £10,000 towards the cost of the project of installing an artificial cricket wicket in the city. And this report is just providing an update on that as part of the requirements under the Constitution. So we've carried out a review of likely venues around the city and came to the conclusion that KG5 playing fields was the most appropriate location in terms of ancillary facilities, you know, parking, access to toilets that go alongside the provision of this type of facility as well. So given the timescale, we, through CLT, have utilised the Managing Director urgency powers to press ahead and get the order placed. So we've gone through the procurement process. We have an appointed installer. The order has been placed and we're just awaiting an installation date at the moment now for probably the end of June. And the installation will take a couple of days. And at that point, we will then have the first publicly accessible artificial cricket wicket in the city, because previous to this, the only way you could access cricket facilities was through joining a club and paying a subscription. And both my boys do exactly that. And I know as a parent just how expensive that is. So, you know, this is about opening up opportunity for local boys, girls, youths to be able to come along and play and try cricket for the first time in many instances. There's a very, very well supported local demand around both the All-Stars and the Dynamos cricket groups, which is the kind of 5 to 8 and the kind of 9 to 13 age groups, where that they come along and try softball cricket before they progress onto hardball. Currently, across there's 2 teams based in the city, which is Old Elizabethans and Old Vigorians, and also Worcester Norton, which is just slightly over the border in Wychavon, but you find that the vast majority of those attending are living in Worcester City. And across those 3 clubs last summer, there was in the region of 250 to 300 children registered on their All-Stars and Dynamos cricket courses. So there's clearly a real demand out there. So we feel that, you know, this provision is going some way to making sure that everybody gets the opportunity to utilise these type of facilities. Thank you.
Thank you. I'll open it up to the floor. Councillor Lawrence, Councillor Lamb and Councillor McCarthy.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Alan. A lot less controversial, this contribution. This is a decision that's already been made, and it's impossible to not vote in favour of this because we're noting it. The question is, and pardon me for being dim, but why has the Managing Director had to use urgency powers? I don't think any of us like it when a Managing Director has to do that because it's taken the power away from councillors. But could you just explain why it's happened on this occasion? Thank you.
Yes, certainly. It was purely aligned to the timescale because of the dates of the playing season, with the cricket season starting in April and running through to kind of mid-September. If we'd had to wait to bring it to the next appropriate committee, which would have been this evening, by the time we'd then gone through the procurement process and got the installation, because the companies are booked weeks in advance, we would have been nearing the end of the playing season, and we didn't want to be in a position whereby we would have been installing the new pitch right in the last few weeks of the season, because whilst you could have, in theory, some winter usage, the vast majority, obviously, of the demand is going to come during the spring and summer months, and that was the reason for it.
Chair, can I just say as well, probably more for the benefit of new members, when the Managing Director uses his urgency powers, that's always done in consultation with the relevant Chair and Vice Chair of the committee. So it's not solely the MD's decision. We always do consult either with the relevant Chair and Vice Chair or sometimes the political leaders as well.
Thanks. Councillor Lamb.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, I support this, and as Lord Denning said, cricket is a delight for everyone. What was particularly good here with my sort of young people's champion hat on was the emphasis on encouraging young people to get involved in this and supporting young people being active in sports. I like the location. I think KG5 is an excellent position for this, lying at the heart of that particular part of the city. I suppose what I'd ask is, obviously in the previous report, when we were talking about the new artificial pitch, there was a lot of emphasis about encouraging underrepresented groups to get involved in football. I mean, I trust there will be a similar push when it comes to this particular facility about encouraging other underrepresented groups about cricket. Because one of the things, I'm not the greatest cricket fan in the world, it's got to be said, but reading this report, as I read it the previous time, you know, the different ways in which cricket is made more accessible to a wider group of people, I think is one of the great delights about this particular sort of project. So I hope this push to encourage underrepresented groups to get involved will continue with this project as well.
Absolutely. I think one of the primary reasons for the suggested location was the fact that enabled us to work alongside Worcester Community Trust to do exactly that. You know, there is provision in local schools locally, and we are just looking to put in a programme of activities in conjunction with both Worcester Community Trust and indeed Freedom Leisure, who are again based at Purdesall, are on the doorstep, to be able to utilise that. So again, you know, underrepresented groups, kind of again during school holidays, there'll be more kind of multi-sport activities on that site, and now cricket for the first time can actually take part in that. So, you know, we're expanding the range of activities that these children can get access to as well.
Thanks. Councillor Mackay.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Yes, I used to play cricket once upon a time quite regularly, but more importantly, I've seen how my grandson and my granddaughter both joined clubs via the schools and such like, and saw the benefits that they had received out of it. It's not just playing the game, which they thoroughly enjoyed, but it's also the socialising as well. And anything that would encourage that, I'm quite happy to support and would willingly take this one forward. And should they bring back softball for adults, I might consider it again, but not with that hard thing at the moment. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Mackay. Councillor Ali.
Of the organizer last season, for the table tournament, where we started, we were invited in Walsall by the few councillors from Walsall Council and some of my friends. They invited us, and we saw they were playing cricket in public park, and there were 3 councillors from different parties there, and there were a lot of people enjoying the game. That was the first game, you know, we were invited and we played. We lost very badly, but because we didn't play it before. Then I was talking to some of the councillors there, and they asked me, do you have anything like that in Worcester? I said, no, unfortunately no. I wasn't interested in politics that time. I didn't think that I will be a councillor one day. I came back and I asked other community people that if you really want to go ahead with that, that's the support most of the people played. The reason my hand is fractured, I always played table cricket, and I had to join the club, and I played for them, but I injured myself because I'm not good enough. That's one of the reasons. Then last season we started the mid. We only played a few games. We arranged some tournaments at Lido Park. That's owned by the Droitwich Cricket Club, and we had to pay a lot of money there. Most of the time they refused to allow us because they were not aware of that sort of game. Even they allowed us, they were very cautious and restrictions. We played few games. We managed tournament. We invited Councillor Jabber and a few other community members, and then we showed that this is something we can work on. And I'm very glad that we got this facility in Worcester. Some of the Asian community, like Indian people here, a lot of doctors from hospital, they want to join cricket, but they can't go to clubs. They want something that they can just go into the field and play. They don't have time for practice and, get fitness. So I'm in favor of that. I'm really grateful for the people who brought forward, especially Councillor Jabbar. He promised us that time that he will work on it, and all the officers. I'm fully support of that. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Petrowski.
Thank you, Chair. I must admit that I cannot claim any knowledge of cricket whatsoever, unlike the Chair, and the complete dedication of Councillor Ali is there for everyone to see. My question is to Alan again, in terms of, and I appreciate it as a fantastic way to engage people of all ages. What about the south of the city? And I know that it has to go somewhere. I'm being a little bit territorial here. I'm probably speaking sort of, I don't know whether Councillor Mackay has similar thoughts, but Norton is near enough, but it's not quite Worcester. I can think of the playing fields which were leased by the university along the Evandine Close, the back of Blessed Edwards. So in terms of providing this kind of attraction and opportunity for people of all ages, are we considering this in other parts of the city? Thank you.
I mean, at this stage, this is the first opportunity we've had to look at it. We clearly did. I did a piece of work in conjunction with our kind of city services team to identify, first of all, potential sites, and then looked at what the kind of strengths and weaknesses were for all of those locations, really. So, yes, they are limited, actually. There aren't that many sites where you've got everything that you would need in order to be able to kind of put that type of facility in, really. Because, again, ultimately, if you're going to provide a public facility, you also want to be in a position where you can provide the ancillary facilities like the toilets and things like that. Otherwise, you do start to get all that antisocial behaviour going on again. So KG5, for that reason, was identified as an ideal location. And this is, of course, the first time we've tried this in the city, being the very first public access facility. So it will be a case then of measuring how successful that's been, with a view then to kind of taking that forward further down the line and looking at what other opportunities exist in other areas of the city then.
I'll take Councillor Hodgson.
Just a very quick thing. I mean, I hope that not only that also women will get a game, and also walking cricket and other things like that, that people with perhaps, or even sort of perhaps not so much mobility and that sort of thing, as well as other things as well, because I think it's not just for some, it is for all. And I would hope that everybody in the city that wants to play cricket can play cricket, because it is a brilliant game.
Thanks, Councillor Hodgson, and I echo those sentiments, because actually one of the first people that contacted me was a ladies cricket club, saying absolutely, they haven't got a home, they need a place to play, and it was really good news. And I said, this is exactly the reason why we're doing it. And going back onto some of the points in terms of the locations, and actually it was a blessing in disguise that we ended up in KG5. There were other locations which were a little bit more controversial that were considered, but it felt that actually when this site was identified, that it meted all the needs of, traditionally cricket has been seen as a upper class game, which is not accessible to a lot. Certainly the traditional red ball cricket game, which is really cost prohibitive in terms of the amount of equipment that you have to buy and the outlays in terms of joining with clubs. And this location, where it is exactly the target audience that the ECB cricket boards are looking to identify, to get get youngsters and women and girls involved in that. And I'll quite happily join Councillor Mackay and Lloyd in the the less mobile group in terms of starting to play in that. I mean, this report, I'd like to thank obviously all those involved in terms of pushing it through and in terms of the timelines as well to ensure that. And as regards your points, if there are, I'm a cricket lover, if there are other sites that you can identify and they are suitable for cricket, I would love more cricket pitches within the city. I think the decision here is for noting. Is that right? Can we all note? Noted. Thank you. Agenda number 8, and we have the extension of the single person and childless couples support service. Tom.
Thank you, Chair. Just to introduce the report and the recommendations that have been brought to the committee this evening. We're seeking approval for an extension of 6 months to the current contracts to provide support to single persons and childless couples within Worcester and across Worcestershire. There is just to draw members' attention that there is an error on the report and it should read the 31st of March 2023, not the 30th of April, just to highlight that point. There is to note that there's a financial contribution which we met by the Flexible Housing Grant Reserve. So the contract in place covers the whole of Worcestershire. Worcester City Council acts as the lead authority for contractual purposes, as there has to be one lead authority. The current contract is with CCP, Caring for Communities and People, and they've been a provider for this service for a number of years, previously commissioned in 2016 and then subsequently recommissioned in 2019. The core sort of focus of the service is twofold. One around crisis prevention, so it's looking to prevent homelessness for single people and childless couples, to prevent them needing to be picked up and supported, and any statutory intervention from our homeless prevention service. And then secondly is around emergency accommodation during severe weather, primarily around during winter months, and providing emergency accommodation for anybody irrespective of eligibility during those months, but also provides hot weather SWEP, so if there's a heat wave, that sort of scenario. We are seeking to extend it for 6 months to enable a more comprehensive review and transition of the existing service. We have been making steps to look at the reprocurement of the service, but there's a number of factors that have led us to feel that an extension at this stage would be most beneficial. We're currently going through the process of revising the Worcestershire rough sleeper and homelessness strategy, which will be out later this year, and we'd like to use the sort of the findings of that to help inform this contract. We've just had the announcement of the rough sleeper initiative. We've yet to have the specific details of what will be coming to Worcester City Council, but that will help also inform what provision we'll be needing to put in place around single people and childless couples. And then lastly is around the SWEP provision. So as SWEP is primarily related to winter weather support for emergency accommodation, it would be most useful to mobilise that after we've gone through that period of time during the winter months. So a degree of timing comes into play as well. Welcome any questions at that stage.
Thank you. Well, Councillor Stephen Hodgson.
Yeah, this is very much a needed service, and that I believe it's been extended. Really, this is a question really about the financial bit. Obviously, Worcester pay the biggest share of this, which is 51,000, right? This is obviously a symptom of the fact that being the county town now, we will attract more homeless people now. So therefore, most of the homeless issues are having to be dealt by our authority. Do we get external funding from government to actually take into account that we have this extra burden? Or is it something that we just have to fund more than our other authorities, some of which are richer financially?
Yeah, I mean, we get an allocation of what was flexible housing, flexible housing grant, now homeless prevention grant. And there is a calculation that's made by government, and that's how we receive that pot of funding, essentially. So it is based on a number of factors, of which demand on services is one of those. It's not strictly directly related to we receive more homeless people, but due to our returns that we send back to government, that does form part of the consideration around what we receive. In terms of the, yes, it costs us more than other authorities, but we do make significantly greater use of the service than other authorities. I think we receive something like 77% of access to the main service, the sort of support service, and the severe weather emergency protocol. I think we've used around about 78 to 80% use of that across the county.
Councillor Lucy Hodgson.
Just like to grow on that. Obviously, our neighbouring authorities pay a lot less, but do any of their clients actually come to Worcester to benefit from our Worcester City's services? And if they do, can we charge back to them any of the actual cost to the clients? Because obviously we want to have the homelessness service that's the best for Worcester, but sometimes are we actually sort of spending more than we have to? Does that make sense?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's recognised that Worcester City certainly attracts people coming into the city and putting pressure on our resources from other areas, both across Worcestershire, but certainly further afield, particularly places like Birmingham, that we do have regular influxes and people coming into the city from other authorities. It's also a bit of a transition point, so we do see people coming into the city, whether they're rough sleeping or approaching as homeless, sort of almost on route to other parts of the country. And so we certainly do see an increased demand from other areas, and some of that is around us having services and support and provision in place.
But actually, can we charge the relevant authorities so that so that it doesn't all fall on Worcester City?
Yeah, so in terms of, for instance, for the severe weather emergency protocol, I think of the 45 people that were accommodated, 35 did have a local connection to Worcester, which means that we would have a responsibility to be picking those up. Of the other people supported through the sort of wider service, the support service, the numbers that we would be funding and contributing towards essentially would be people that we have a duty and responsibility towards. So if they were from another Worcestershire authority, yes, they would be part of that sort of allocation essentially. So we're not necessarily seeing the same influxes from those, and we're not subsidising. Yeah.
Okay, Councillor Sarah.
Thank you. I was just wondering, in the light of the cost of living crisis looming, how does this look going forward? I mean, is 6 months and this amount of money enough? Have you got any view on it?
Yeah, I mean, it's something we're sort of acutely aware of and really trying to keep abreast of. Homelessness in presentations has increased and is sort of seems to be showing along that similar trajectory. Our sort of focus is around prevention, so this is a key service around prevention. So when somebody does approach us to indicate that they are at risk of homelessness, if they're single and childless couple, we'll refer immediately into this service to try and prevent it. So demand is very difficult to predict really, but we do anticipate overall homelessness numbers to increase and to demanding for there to be an increase in demand. What that looks like, how that presents is still to be seen. But if we can prevent people's homelessness, so in terms of cost of living, if that's because of rent arrears or other things, you know, if we're aware of those early on and having services such as these in place, does mean that we can hopefully prevent them from actually physically becoming homeless.
Thank you. Councillor Mackay.
Yeah, thank you very much. Obviously, not forgetting 1 minute our moral, societal obligations and such like. This is really about prevention as much as anything else. And I just wonder, has there been any study done at all to establish what the savings are by doing this, as opposed to not taking any action? To put it in sort of lay terms, how do we know that this is working? Because I'm sure it is, and I'm sure it is saving us money. But I just wondered if there's any actual sort of figures worked out at all.
Not specifically that I could put my hands on. It's something that we could go away and do some work on and some modelling on. Certainly, the cost to individuals and monetary costs to the authority would be significantly higher if people were subsequently homeless. So through the provision of temporary accommodation, if they were eligible for that. We would certainly see an increase in rough sleeping, particularly as this cohort would be single people. We'd probably see a lot more people displaced from Worcester, so where we don't have huge amounts of hostel accommodation. If that became saturated, any provision we had in the city, people would be forced to go outside of the city. So in terms of a monetary cost, I'm fairly confident in saying that it does significantly outweigh the cost of not having it in place, but I wouldn't be able to sort of provide any figures of what that looks like.
No, thank you, Chair. I just think it's important to note that you've actually said that, the fact that it is saving us money, and it's something obviously I will happily support, but I think it's right that should be out there in the public interest.
Shane, do you want to come in on that point?
Thank you, Chair. Just for interest for members, Crisis UK estimate that the cost of rough sleeping for 12 months is £20,128, and the cost of successful intervention is £1,426. So considerably lower. Obviously, we can't verify those figures, but that's an estimate by Crisis UK.
Thank you. Very significant, I think. Councillor Pstrowski.
Just a very quick observation on the basis of Tom's report and also something that Councillor Mackay mentioned in terms of the savings. What about considering adopting a framework for calculating and therefore coming up with some kind of monetary value for added social value? So HACT or something along those lines that would satisfy our financial concerns about the prudence of this as a sound financial decision, but also not only this project, but also other projects might benefit from. Just
interesting point, and part of our consideration place to look at performance, so around health and well-being, economic well-being, sustainability of tenure as well, so that there is, you know, prevention's fine if it's temporary or just keeps people in place for a short period of time, but actually what we want to achieve is something much more than that. Social value, you know, it can be quite challenging to get something really meaningful, but it is something that we are looking at doing and looking at how we can capture something that you know, that really does demonstrate that additional value that it does provide. So through the extension, we will be looking to change and moving forward through the sort of re-procurement next time round, would be looking at having a much more robust approach to capturing some form of social value.
Councillor Cleary.
Just a comment, really, by way of comparison. I think this is to coin an expression, this is a no-brainer. To put it in comparison, we've just agreed 200 grand for a football pitch, 10 grand for a cricket pitch. This could save some lives. Again, this is a no-brainer, and I think it's a really good report. Thank you.
Thanks. I'll sum up then if there aren't any more discussions, any more debates. No, it's fine. I mean, really some really good points made again by various committee members. I mean, I take on Councillor Lucy Hodgson's point regarding when we do go out for tender, making sure that it's the tender is right for Worcester. And, you know, a lot of what we've done over the pandemic has been really, really excellent work in terms of reaching out to our homeless, and it really has shown that we are able to make significant strides in dealing with those really difficult issues and getting provision and support. So we know that there is where there's a will, there is a way, and we can come up with it. Obviously, some of those figures have been skewed, some of that analysis, hence why I suppose the team weren't able to renew that contract in the knowledge that some of the figures might have been out. I mean, since 2012, I mean, I remember being the cabinet member of housing and homeless, and we've been a hotspot's the wrong word, but we've been a really, really welcoming city to our homeless. People have recognised the level of care and attention and kindness that we give to our homeless. That's why the homeless keep choosing Worcester as a destination to go to, because we do it really, really well. And that is a badge of honour, I think, for our city, that we are a kind, compassionate, caring city. So, you know, we continue to do that well, and I'm sure we're in good hands in terms of the next round of CCP contract, and it's really vital that we extend this so that we make the best decision going forward. We're asking for... So just we'll take each point individually. 1.1, so there's a slight amendment, which is the date at the end, but approve a 6-month extension of the Worcestershire Single Person and Childless Couples Homeless Prevention Support Service contract to cover the period 30th of September 2022 to the 30th of March 2023. All those in favour? Thank you. Right. 1.2, note that the Council's financial contribution towards the contract extension period of £51,605 even will be funded from the Flexible Housing Grant Reserve. All those in favour? Carried. 1.3, to note that a future report will be presented to this committee following a review of the existing contract and outlining options for future service provision. All those in favour? That's carried. Thank you. Okay, item number 9. Tom, is that you again? Is that Lloyd?
Lloyd. Thank you, Chair. And Chair, if you don't mind, I'll spend a little bit more time than I usually would in this report, given its content. Chair, in January 21, this committee received a report on council-led housing development in recognition that development of housing, and in particular affordable housing, was not keeping up with local demand. This committee and the Council's Income Generation Committee approved a total funding of £40,000 that enabled officers to engage strategic housing advice to undertake that piece of work. And subsequently, our consultancy were engaged via a procurement exercise. And pleasingly, members have had 2 opportunities to meet with ARC via informal briefing sessions either side of the election process. ARC commenced their work in November 21, and an Appendix 1 to this report is the output report, which is a lengthy document but contains some really interesting and useful information. It's confirmed that there's a growing unmet need in respect of affordable housing across Worcester, and what that looks like. And to go into the numbers very, very briefly, Worcester City now has a newly arising affordable housing need of 384 households per annum. And when you combine that with historic unmet need, this now amounts to a total unmet need in the city of 458 households per annum. So that is growing. The mix of tenure shows a requirement for 69% of affordable homes to be provided for rent, and the majority of those being for social rent, and the remainder of those should be made up of affordable home ownership products. Importantly, the ARC report also brought out that between 2020 and 2041, there's a forecast increase in those with a physical disability of 22% and those with a learning disability of 43%. And the strategic housing market assessment suggests that should be built to wheelchair accessible standards that accommodates the increasing level of disability in the population and the generally ageing population as well. The ARC reports reaffirmed the challenging operating environment the council faces, and in paragraph 3.5 and the bullet points underneath that, it lists what they are. We're a relatively small city, so we're constrained by both boundaries and site availability. It's recognised that, you know, as we transferred our housing stock many years ago, a lot of skills and capacity went with that. We've reached a position where the balance of resource in our strategic housing team is now outweighed towards homelessness and housing solutions rather than strategic housing and housing enabling. We also rely on the urban extension through the South Worcestershire Development Plan, and so a lot of our housing needs to be met by Wychavon and Malvern councils with sites just on the border. And it also picks up that in our affordable housing policy in Worcester City Council is for 30% of new homes to be developed as affordable on brownfield sites and 40% on greenfield sites. We're averaging about 26% of all homes being provided as affordable housing. So that's certainly not bad, but it's not policy compliant. But it is important to note that the ARC report does provide some data that shows that 26% against the 30% target is reasonably a good result. The ARC reports identified a wide range of options and recommendations that they feel that we should consider as a council and progress if we are to improve our position as a housing enabler and influence both the volume and pace of house building. And those options and recommendations have been grouped into themes. I think the important part of this report is for members to note that the actions that we as officers have deemed quick wins, so low risk and low cost, and they're the ones that we want to get on with and progress as soon as we possibly can. And they are laid out at 3.8. And I'll just cover a couple of those off, Chair, if I may. Bullet point C1, C3, review and redefine the housing strategy and housing enabling function roles. As I say, over time, we've grown into a housing service that focuses heavily on homelessness and homelessness prevention. And we've probably spent less time, effort and energy in housing enabling. So that's something that we wish to look at moving forward. To come back a page, apologies, A2, bullet point A2, establishing a housing delivery group. That is simply bringing together internally a group of officers, so across planning, finance, housing, regeneration, bringing officers together to be able to think more strategically about housing. So rather than just reacting to planning applications as and when they arrive with us, it's about getting on the front foot and thinking about what opportunities exist out there in terms of housing sites, but also how we work with registered providers. That's something that we're looking to set up quickly as well. Bullet point C4, establishing a brief for the appointment of a retained specialist external advisor. I think we've certainly picked up through working with ARC the level of expertise and knowledge that contractors like ARC carry, and that we can certainly benefit from as and when we need to. So again, something that we're keen to do is to look to procure some support to draw down as and when we need it. There's a point there around being able to challenge more robustly viability arguments when they're presented to us. A lot of the time, it's very difficult to challenge back against viability arguments, and we have varying degrees of success in that. But again, that's something that with retained specialist support, we think we can improve on. In addition to some of those shorter term options, Chair, the ARC report also lays out all options, and the appraisal matrix for those options is included at Appendix 2 for ease of reading for members. Many of the options are intended to be progressed by the Council, but it's felt they need to form part of a housing enabling strategy. Just for us to go off and do those without any sort of context or setting that out in a framework that meets with sort of the wider corporate implications just feels a little bit in the dark. So this report is seeking members' endorsement for us back to you later on this year. And final point, Chair, is one of the key areas that we asked ARC to focus on was the potential for the Council to become a direct developer of homes. On page 42 to 55 of the ARC report goes into further detail on those options. However, the advice at this stage is that the Council should not progress developing a special purpose vehicle for housing production or enter into any long-term joint venture with a private developer or a registered provider. Some of the reasons for that is that there is a limited scope for development within Worcester because of the reasons I sort of mentioned earlier around site constraints and site availability. And we as a council are also sort of asset weak. We don't own much land, certainly land that's readily available for housing. So we don't have much to offer in way of land contribution. And any option like that would also require the council to recruit additional and specialist resource at a time when our medium-term financial plan needs us to make significant savings. There are no financial or budgetary implications associated with this particular report, Chair, but what we have done is we've set out where we are in terms of financial reserves in respect of housing, because the likelihood is that when we come back with a housing enabling strategy, some of those actions will have a pounds and pence and shillings next to it for us to progress some of those longer term actions. So happy to leave it there, Chair, and take any questions.
Councillor Lucy Hodgson.
Thank you for that. Thank you for this report. It's a very enlightening report, and it's a very comprehensive report. And I presume that the planning policy team under Corin and his team will be part of the assessment, because I think some of this should actually be put into the SWDP review. It's got to be now, because some of the outcomes are actually pertinent to so it's Malvern Hills and Wychavon as well, and we've got to work together again, because otherwise I don't think we're going to achieve it. But I certainly welcome it.
Thanks. Thank you, Councillor Hodgson. Councillor Lumb.
Thank you. It's a very interesting report, and obviously went to the online feedback from the ARC people themselves, which was also very interesting. But I think it says something. The fact that it's called an enabling strategy tells you everything that's changed about the relationship between local councils and housing in the last 40 years, isn't it? Really, that we've moved away from being a provider to being an enabler. But clearly, the report itself shows that strategy, that paradigm that we've accepted for the last 30 years as that is the only way we can provide housing. It simply isn't working, isn't it, to be honest with you? You said, 458 houses needed. We've only got 77. So something isn't quite working there. And obviously an enabling council is about nudging and persuading, cajoling and working with private sector providers in order to build the houses. But clearly that's not working, because we all know that housing providers, people who build houses are trying to maximise their profits, and therefore these kind of houses are not the ones that always make the most money. So it was interesting to read about the more radical option, which was suggested by ARC, which was that Worcester City Council becomes a direct provider again. In some form. I know there are limits, only the maximum you can have is 200 properties, but when you look at the gap at the moment, 200 would be a movement in the right direction. And I do hear what Lloyd is saying there. However, the advice at this stage, where is that advice? Is that coming from officers? Because clearly from the case studies that are provided by ARC, other councils are looking at this. And I don't think it's a party political thing. I don't know what the makeup of Herefordshire County Council is, but, they are thinking, well, let's actually get in and provide this ourselves, to provide that actual direct control and the fact that directly affordable houses. So I'm just wondering whether we are perhaps rejecting the most radical option a little bit too easily, to be honest with you.
It's a really good question, Councillor Lumb.
Yeah, I think Officer View, before we undertook the study, or before ARC undertook the study, was that we'd heard good and bad stories about direct development, and so council arm's length companies or companies that have been set up for that purpose. So I think we were we didn't have a strong view on it. You're absolutely right, Councillor Lamb. There are examples around the country of where this has worked well, but there are also examples of where it hasn't worked well. But what I would say is this is not a never. This is just a now. There are some short-term options that we feel are low risk, low cost, that we can get on with. And I think one of the precursors to us being able to do something around one of the some of the more complicated options is developing our relationships with registered providers. So our relationships are good, but what I would say, I think they could be far more effective. And I think that's where that's where I think the chances lie for us in being able to do something. We've certainly we can blame COVID slightly, but I think being able to work with, understand better what our registered provider aspirations are, what their plans are, and how we can assist them in doing that. That's where I think we can get to a place where some of those more aspirational options are.
On that. It's such a sort of big discussion point. I know the committee system is great because we can have this kind of detailed discussion, but it's almost one of those things that needs to be discussed at full council. The principle, because it is a big move. I appreciate that, with huge risks, but with huge, I think, potential benefits. And I think it is something that's so fundamental that it would need to be discussed at full council, because moving forward, it obviously would be a great big move. But I'm glad to see it hasn't been sort of ruled out full stop. This is something we're never going to do. But I do think, if we move down the road and this strategy still hasn't produced these kind of things we want, then I think we do have to sort of be bold and be brave and look at some perhaps more radical sort of ideas, actually.
Thank you, Councillor Lamb. I have Councillor Lawrenson and then Councillor Cleary.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I chime with Councillor Lamb's comments. I think it's quite timid, but I think, this conversation is a symptom of Thatcherism. We can't rewind the clock. We are where we are. But I agree. I think maybe this is a platform for eventually a more ambitious strategy. But let's see what happens at the meeting in November. I'm going to rattle through these. On top page 63, but page 27 in the report, there's mention of Plymouth City Council, and it says that they found funding for specialist housing. I wondered whether we could be inspired by Plymouth and other councils, and whether specialist housing would equate to passive housing, which I've been repeatedly told over the last 10 years is not possible in Worcester. I disagree. And we can see in this report that other councils are being ambitious. So question one is, does specialist housing equal, or could it equal passive house? Point/question two is the report recommends that at least 1.5 posts in this council are devoted to housing and enabling. If we do increase the amount of staff involved in this, is that a committee decision or is that an internal officer-led decision? I'm almost there. There was a briefing for councillors on the 25th of May about the ARC report that we're discussing now. And the representative from ARC said that the number of applicants for housing had gone down from 4,500 to 1,200. And to quote the representative from ARC, it said that the online processes might be too challenging, end quote. The recommendation from that consultant from ARC was that this council checks the reasons for the reduction in applicants on the register. I think that's a huge number of people who are just giving up. And I think, the question is, are we going to rectify that? 3,300 people are effectively giving up their application because the online system appears to be too difficult. So I'd really urge us to look into that. Point 4, it says in the report that affordable housing is not a clear priority in the City Plan 2022 to 2027. There's a fantastic, or perhaps awful euphemism on page 52, which is actually page 16 of the report, 6.20. The master plan does not reference affordable housing as being a priority. It is understood that there are concerns that affordable housing would not stimulate economic activity due to the residents of those types of homes having more limited resources and spending power than residents of homes in market tenures. Correct me if I'm wrong, but that is a euphemism for we don't want poor people living in the city centre. So can someone in this room assure me that this city council is not agreeing to bar poor people from living in Worcester city centre?
Chair, the first point around specialist housing, my knowledge of the subject area, that means housing that's adapted for special needs. So whether that be disability, mental health, or those, it isn't what I would call green housing. So that's the first one. The second one around 1.5 posts, the recommendation for enabling capacity. That's an operational matter for the managing director and for the leadership team, so that wouldn't require any member decision.
We'd have to approve it here, though.
No. That's an operational.
Not a counter.
No. If we would look to deal with that within existing resources, Chair. So yeah, that would be an operational matter for officers. Councillor Lawrenson has assumed a position around the housing register, and we've already looked into that, thankfully, because when John raised that, my heart sank. So what I've been told by Madeline, and Tom may want to come in on this as well, is that every so often we do a sort of a purge of the housing register, because it will grow, people will stay on there for some time. And when we do the purge, that naturally results in people falling off the list, not out of because there's any difficulty or challenge, it's just because their situation, their circumstances have moved on, and there's no longer a requirement for them to be on there, which is their choice. I checked in with the team last week, and we are now back up to around 3,000 on the housing register. And I was also reassured that when we went through that process, not only did we write to every person on the housing register by letter, hard copy, we also emailed them several times. So I'm absolutely assured that from our communication point of view, we did everything we possibly could to make sure that if there was any support needed for anybody, to make sure they found their way onto that new list, we did so. The last point, Chair, I can speak soundly from an officer point of view. That absolutely isn't the will of this council. It's been recognised within some of our corporate plans that it doesn't feature, but from an officer point of view, we are absolutely strong in our aspiration to increase the volume and pace of housing, particularly affordable housing, and that's the reason for this piece of work.
I mean, Councillor Lawrenson does make a good point. Within the city centre, the permitted development rights and the amount of conversions above shop fronts, where we are not taking into consideration affordable units in those, are we? I mean, I think that's the crux of the matter within it, and how do we address that?
I think it probably relates to a point that Councillor Hodgson made earlier, and it's how we work as a council internally, how we work with our colleagues in planning policy, in development control, but also, without overplaying it, it's how we use this piece of work to drive future decisions and in particular policy decisions.
Thank you. I think of Councillor Cleary next.
Thanks, Chair. It's just a question. It's in the summary, number 3, part 4. And forgive me if I've misinterpreted these figures, but it says here that over the next 20 odd years, there's an expected increase in those with a physical disability in Worcester of 22%, and those with a learning disability of 43%. Now, if you were to tell me that we're going to see a 22% increase in the people with a physical disability, I'd expect the population of the city to increase by 22%. So I'm wondering, have I misinterpreted these figures? Because this looks like an awfully large jump as a prediction over the next 20 years. Does that make sense? Right?
It does make sense. Sorry, Chair, it does make sense. That I think it's based on the proportion of people. That, if that makes sense, back to you, Councillor Cleary. But I would need to go away, Chair, and check rather than give an answer that may not be correct. I'm more than happy to come back to committee and clarify.
Thank you. I've got Councillor Puchowski.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for the opportunity to sit in the briefing session, which I found really informative. I'd like to start by stating the obvious. Of course, we need more affordable housing. However, in terms of the report, I was actually quite disappointed that the consultants have, in my view, and I voiced this during the briefing session back in May, haven't consulted with Worcestershire County Council sufficiently enough, because housing on its own, it's all very well, but in terms of providing the infrastructure, I'm thinking about public health and transport, for instance. We have to take it into consideration, and we have to sort of think about those things as part of a holistic solution to housing and building communities that are resilient. My second sort of disappointment with the report was pretty frank admission of the author, or somebody who was representing the authors of the report, that our environmental sustainability strategy hasn't been consulted. That's pretty shocking, if I'm honest, because housing contributes roughly about 1/3 of CO2 emissions in the city of this size. So that's worrying. In terms of, just a quick point, in terms of how the strategy is going to be drafted and presented to this committee in November. I think, first of all, a word of caution, and this is sort of linked to my comment about the environmental sustainability strategy. It's the law of this land that Britain will become carbon neutral by 2015. There's an act of parliament that has been passed. So if we are going along the more ambitious sort of possibility here, options here, and going into more provision than enabling, we have to bear in mind things like the cost of retrofitting, for instance. So that's pretty significant. It could be anything from £2,000-3,000 per property, all the way up to £40,000 per property, depending on what it is. And also in terms of how this could be managed, and this is not to be sort of too negative about this, but just the complexity, if you start going into the provider sort of element of this, is increasing pretty rapidly if we start talking about a number of allocations. Just a quick point about those figures about disabilities. Worcester is roughly around 15-16% of people declaring a form of disability, roughly. So I interpret them as the percentage of that cohort growing by 22 and 45%. I'm not sure about people on the spectrum. So it's not the case of 22% of people in Worcester has, yeah. So just as a clarification, but I'm looking forward to seeing the strategy and as it's outlined, presented here in November. But those two sort of main points about taking the infrastructure when thinking about formulating the strategy is one point, and then the environmental impact is the second point, major point on this. Thank you.
Yeah, Lloyd, do you want to quickly?
Yeah, just very quickly, Chair. As ARC informed members on the night, there were repeated attempts to make contact with Worcestershire County Council, but due to circumstances out of our control, that never happened. I think just to reassure Councillor Petrowski around the sort of green agenda in housing, this is a housing enabling strategy. So this is about how we work with and intervene in, in trying to develop housing, both volume and pace. There's a separate piece of work around a Worcestershire housing strategy, and that gets more into the, what houses look like, where do they need to go, what needs to be inside them. So that's where I would see the green agenda around housing and green in housing being more focused. That's not to say it shouldn't be in here and it shouldn't be referenced. But it's the other piece of work where I think, as a council, we can set out what it is we're after from an environmental sustainability point of view.
Thank you. Can I have Councillor Mackay, please?
Thank you, Chair. I'm sure that, like me, you recognise the way in which this report was initialised. It started probably very much within income generation, the subcommittee from P&R. Where there was quite a degree of cross-party support for looking into the question of whether or not the council could become either developer in its own right or an arm's length entity. I think what we've seen from the report is that as much as we'd like to think that we could do something that would well increase the number of houses straight away or immediately by doing something like that, the risks, and Councillor Lamb, you referred to the huge risks that are there if we were to do that, having seen what other councils have been through, then this is public money at the end of the day, and the idea of putting such money to such risks at present are not, for me, a good way forward. What the report does set out to do, as it says, and as Lloyd pointed out, that it's an enabling idea that's being put forward. In other words, that this council should be more interventionist with its powers, and more interventionist with housing authorities, housing associations, whatever, able to move them forward and to come up with other ideas with them as to ways and means that we can move on So I think the report itself it really is as it is and as it says at the present time. And we're going to have to wait and see till November as to exactly what is being suggested there. But the whole idea is that we work certainly more collaboratively with other associations and to make our stance well known to them and become what we should be doing perhaps with a little bit more commitment than we have in the past as a council.
Thank you for that rather stoic reply in terms of some of the items in here. And Councillor De Serra, I'll take you as the last speaker on this item.
I just wondered what leverage we do have with any of the providers. I think possibly there is some moral leverage with platform, but the others, I think they're not just almost a law unto themselves.
There is no formal leverage we have with any registered housing provider. We're not in any agreement with any provider, whether it be short-term or long-term. But what this report sets out to do and what the housing strategy will set out to do will be to look at the range of, softer measures that we can employ, whether that be through, collaborative working, right through to, financial contributions, possibly land availability that we may have, although that's not a ready-made option. So there's nothing formal in terms of what we have at our disposal. It's just about thinking a bit outside the box of what are the softer measures we can deploy.
Come back on that, fine.
Just a further question then. Because I'm new to the council, etc., and I've got a lot of housing issues where I am. What specific support do councillors have from the officers to improve that relationship with the providers? Because you've probably been dealing with them for a long time and I don't even know these people.
So if you as a councillor are feel you're not getting somewhere with a registered housing provider, then by all means, contact the housing service. Utilise myself and Tom in the first instance, and then we can, through our teams, we can try and progress those matters for you.
Thanks, and watch this space on that issue. That is a common issue amongst a lot of councillors, I believe. So we're in the process of addressing that issue. Okay, there's no more speakers, and there's a really good debate again on this item and a wide-ranging opinion. I mean, certainly Councillor Mackay has picked up on certainly my ambition in terms of committing some funds towards this report in terms of, pursuing the idea of a development company within the Worcester, and the report quite rightly highlights some risks and quite rightly highlights some successes in there. I mean, historically, we've been both as a council and as a income generation committee with our other hats on, being cautious, and we've been prudent, and we've been savvy in terms of how we've invested our money and where we've gone with certain projects, and and that's well documented in those reports that we are a little bit risk averse in this country. But I recognise that in this report also is a damning report of the state of housing within the city. The lack of affordable housing being built, the lack of quality housing being built, the number of people that are on the waiting list, and something drastic has to be done. Some of those, sometimes I agree with some of these members here that brave decisions need to be made in order for us to address those situations. When we hope that when the report comes to us in November, that it does take into consideration the very stark reality that we're just simply not doing enough. Some of this stuff we knew, but it's just been made official through the findings of this report. We know that we have to work closer with the planning department. We know we have to work closer with other departments within the city in terms of bringing all these elements together. That has to be with the chair of E&D and policy and resources, that we have a combined strategy to enable to unlock these opportunities. The sensible suggestion of holding developers to account for the lack of viability and questioning those every time a developer comes back and says we're not able to do that. There are clear methods which other councils have adopted that we could adopt here, pre-planning stage, which are really simple steps in order for us to guarantee some of those outputs that we aim to get. And in terms of land unlocking and opportunity, that makes perfect sense in terms of if their site becomes available within the city and we have some interest in it, why wouldn't we maximize it to that potential? So that we, that extra resourcing is a must if we are to realize those opportunities. Finally, the interim step before that final step, in terms of the land, in terms of a development company, is that joint venture model, isn't it? That is our greatest opportunity, as Lloyd has after with our social housing providers and maybe possibly others. We shouldn't be risk averse to looking at those opportunities, especially where we've got land that we own or is out on lease that developers are looking to develop on. There is clearly an opportunity there where the developers and social housing landlords have got the expertise that we haven't, and we've got the land and the interest and the other stuff that can make those deals happen. And I just want to say that we should be more braver and more proactive in what comes out of this. This is a kind of a watershed moment for us in terms of the recommendations in this report, and I just hope that we don't lose the opportunities of being forward-looking and really grasping the issues of the lack of housing within the city. So we'll take the recommendations each by point. 1.1, note that the contents of this report, and in particular the art consultancy options appraisal reports for council-led housing development and for fully utilising housing enabling at Appendix 1. All those in favour, please. Agreed. 1.2, endorse the development of a Worcester City Council housing enabling strategy with a draft strategy to be presented back to this committee in November 2022 for approval. All those in favour? Agreed. Thank you. Thanks for your hard work. Okay, agenda item number 10. Warwick, I believe this is yours.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, this report is the proposed closure of two pedestrian footpaths which cross railway level crossings in Worcester. One is the Cayes level crossing and the other is the Brickfields railway crossing. We're asking you to note the contents of the report, and particularly the outcome of the public consultation exercise in regards to specifically the order itself that will be put in place. And the other 2 points are to whether you approve the arrangement of those two orders. So I'm conscious that a lot of the councillors here tonight haven't been part of the process getting here. So I'll try and tread a balance of the salient points, but also giving you some context and background to public space protection orders. So the public space protection order is something the City Council can put in place and not the County Council or any other statutory body. It's specifically the local authority that has to do it. And the reason why we're looking at this particularly is the old gating orders that people would have used to close footpaths have been amalgamated in the public space protection order policy and procedures. So this is the third time it's come to Communities Committee, the reason being that we identified the need and asked permission to consult on issues around the two level crossings with the public. Then we brought the consultation report back to say that there was a need because of antisocial behaviour and public perception of safety to raise an order, but what you have to do in order to put an order in place is to consult on that order itself. So this is what we're bringing back tonight, is the consultation specifically on the detailed order itself. So the background to why these two particular crossings, the Brickfields level crossing has been closed for a number of years now, precisely between 6 and 8 years, and this would be a reissuing of the order. We can only put an order in place for 3 years, and up to 3 years is the maximum length of time when we have to reconsult to make sure that the antisocial behaviour is still an issue or concern. The Cayes level crossing one particularly had a series incidents over a 6-month period, which led to us be able to temporarily close for safety reasons and then carry out this exercise. And detailed in the report under 3.2 to 3.5 details those more recent incidents on the Cayes crossing for your information. So the consultation itself was carried out online, and we did some social media posting and promotion, press releases as well to raise awareness. We had 102 responses to the survey. We had, we separated the survey out into two specific locations because we did have feedback from the previous survey that we'd just done both locations in one survey and people felt it difficult to differentiate. And we particularly wanted to understand who was responding from a locality perspective as well. So we wanted to know specifically from Brickfields who was local to Brickfields and using that particular location, and who was local to Cayes Crossing and using that particular location. So under section 6, we've detailed out those consultation responses where we had 102 responses to the Brickfields survey and we had 161 responses to the Cayes survey. I'll jump down to the analysis and insight. We understood that 75% of both consultations were from respondents near to the level crossings. The previous consultation on the need for the public space protection order identified that 70% of people said that those two crossings were an issue and should be included in a closure order. However, this particular exercise that we've run recently on the order itself, we had much more 50-50 for Brickfields, where 53% agreed to the closure of the crossing, but on the Cayes survey, only 37% agreed to the closure of the crossing. We've for member benefit and to understand what we're doing, we always do an equality impact assessment of those responses, and so I've identified from detail in those two surveys that across those two surveys, 24 residents, well, we picked out, there's 2 characteristics that were affected from the protected characteristics. Those were age and disability. Age both under youth age and then also age of retirement age and plus, and disability. So looking into the detail of those 2 characteristics, 24 respondents were from residents who identified themselves as being disabled, and 23 of those 24 lived nearby to one of the 2 railway crossings. And then I've split out responses specifically from those protected characteristics under 7.6 for Brickfields and for Cayes. And you can see predominantly most of those were against the closures. The reasons being for those closures tended to be about inconvenience. The previous consultation that we did and fed back to committee identified that alternative routes were safe. Yes, they were slightly longer, but they were safe and accessible and people could use them. But we didn't go into that detail on this one because obviously we're looking particularly at the order rather than the detail of options. So in summary, we have brought to committee this particular piece of work. This is the 3rd time of coming, and we've provided quite a lot of detail on the reasons why it's a closure, not CCTV, not a bridge, and those sorts of reasons. And committee has led us to the closure is the right approach. There is some negative impact for people with disabilities and age characteristics as a result of these closures going in. However, when we concern, it's blend of mobility issues compared to the loss of life, the impact of the antisocial behaviour on the railway network itself seems to outweigh obviously the impact on those protected characteristics, and therefore it's recommended in this report that those 2 public space protection orders go ahead. Happy to take questions.
Okay, Councillor Lamb, Hodgson and Lawrenson.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yeah, I mean, obviously the Kays crossing is in my ward, or at least half of it is in my ward in St John's, and having looked at obviously the consultation we did earlier on, last year, I was convinced that it should be closed, and I still remain that now, actually, and I think this sort of highlights one of the paradoxes of representative democracy, isn't it? That we have got to be responsive as elected politicians, but we've also got to be responsible. And I think in this particular case, there is clearly, when it came to the consultation, when it came to people who actually responded, there was a clear, as you've said, 63% disagreed with the closure of the crossing. But having read through the report, having read the various recommendations, I'm still remain convinced that it's the right thing to do. And just for a second again, putting my sort of young person and children's hat on, as you say, one of the most at risk groups is children and young people, and that's been shown by the evidence. So I do support this, even though the people who vote me have got a different view, but that's one of the things we have to do as a councillor sometimes. But one of the things I would say, and one of the things that's been highlighted by my fellow councillors in St John's, is obviously the crossing has been closed, but the fencing that's in place, and it has been highlighted in 3.2, has been vandalised regularly. So I think what we need to do is, if this is passed today, which I hope it will be, I think we really have to make sure that any fencing is really robust, it's strong, because people have said to me, I've spoken to people in the last couple of days, oh, but people are still going on it. The fence hasn't stopped and they're still going on it, so what's the point in closing it? So I think we really have to make sure that the fencing put in place is strong, it deters people going on the track. I mean, look, you can't have a 10-foot fence, people, if they're determined to do so, will do so, but I think we have to make it as difficult as possible for these people, for anyone to get onto that crossing. But I do support this closure.
Thank you. Councillor Hodgson.
Yeah, I mean, in a nutshell, basically, trains and pedestrians sharing the same piece of track is never particularly a good idea. I mean, I can certainly see the benefit of them as walking routes. Probably the St John's one is probably, the Cade one is probably more useful, because it does actually mean a long path becomes a dead end, resembling usefulness. And I therefore would have to support the closing of it. But I think certainly probably in the case of the Cade crossing, perhaps it's something to look at a future project to see if that could actually be made into some sort of safe bridge or something over it, if funding could be found from some sources for that, because obviously we are looking at ways of, for people to be less dependent upon cars and things to actually move in that, and that quite clearly seems to be quite sort of a logical route to get to that particular point, although there is a safe crossing at Mecco just down there. So for example, if you are going into town, there is actually, a safe place to cross anyway. But yeah, that's my thought. I mean, I was on this committee when it was last discussed, and we took the same decision, and nothing's changed since then. So I suggest we vote for the closure again.
Thank you, Councillor Hodgson. Lawrenson.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I appreciate Warwick. I'm a new member of the committee and a lot of work's been done to date, and then I come in and complicate things with my contributions. So here goes. Yeah, I have to confess my ignorance of, until now, public spaces protection orders under the Anti-Social Behaviour Crime Policing Act. I'll investigate that one later on. I just want to draw members' attention to point 8.1 on page 113. 8.1a, page 113, talking about antisocial behaviour. One of the criteria is it has a detrimental effect on the quality of people's lives, which personally I think is a wonderful way of describing the fact that 92% of England is inaccessible to the public, given how much of England is under private ownership. The Antisocial Behaviour Act itself seems part of a trend which started in 1994 with the Criminal Justice and Public Order Act, which created the offence of aggravated trespass. Then you've got the Serious Organised Crime and Policing Act 2005. And then you've got the Policing Act this year, which is putting a ban on noisy protest. What I'm getting at is, our rights of access have gradually been chipped away at through national legislation. And I'm alarmed at the idea of here and now saying you can't use public rights of way. It's not why I was elected, to stop people using public rights of way. And I noticed in the surveys, people have actually said that's why I'm opposing this, because I want to keep that public right of way. The justification for preventing access has been antisocial behaviour. But how many incidents of antisocial behaviour have occurred in the high street? Would we stop access to the high street for 3 years? And finally, 102 people have said no, they don't want the Cayes crossing access to be stopped, and yet here we are potentially saying no, we are going to stop it. So I appreciate it's a very small survey, and perhaps lots of other people just couldn't be bothered to fill it in, and they would say yes, stop access. But I come back to what I started off with. I find it unsettling that we're talking about reducing access when 92% of the land is inaccessible as it is. So I think there's possibly a better solution, safety measures, whatever it may be. And I do appreciate a lot of work's been done, and yet here I come in and start banging on about national legislation. But hey, I'm an anorexic, autistic politician, so there we are.
Okay, before you answer that, do we have any data on how many deaths have occurred on level crossings or crossings?
Through you, Chair. So we have detailed, let me just scroll back up, through the issues at Cayes Crossing specifically, which was one fatality in that 6-month period. So in that 6-month period, one fatality, which was a deliberate act. I guess it's that sort of context of location. I think, Neil, won't we go back to High Street and this particular instance. And then we've got deliberate sort of access engagement with the train itself when it's moving through the city. And this particular case is the more contentious one, I think, because it's a new one, and the public response. And to do it justice is that that particular location, the sight lines are really poor, both for the driver and the person crossing. So that judgment over whether you can get across in time and it's not going to be an issue, it is a problem at that particular location. But it's not enough for them to bring in other measures to do risk assessments and other bits and pieces for them to say it's unsafe. And we have covered that off in previous reports, and I do appreciate that people are coming here to the first time. So it's not a problem to pick it up. This isn't like the first thing we've gone to either. Like Network Rail have done, with British Transport Police, they've done engagement with young people in schools. They've patrolled. They've looked at putting bridges in. They've looked at CCTV. They've looked at other mechanisms that can use on those junctions. But none of them will actually solve the ASB problem, which is why they've come to us. And we take it because we didn't want to put the PSBO in the first place. But so we've gone through all the same checks and balances to sort of say, is this necessary? It is only temporary, and it's temporary up to 3 years because you're not allowed to remove a right of way for these purposes. So I don't know if that's any consolation for you that we'll be coming back if this puts in place to review it within the 3 years. So yeah, hopefully that sort of answers some of your concerns. And the principle, I know what you're coming from. Yeah.
Okay.
Yes, thank you. Antisocial behaviour is a hugely subjective term, but we are national legislation, and it filters down to local government, and we have to respond to that. So I appreciate that you're just working within the rules. Thank you.
Okay. Councillor Cleary, I believe.
Thanks, Chair. Just 2 points, really. I want to just echo the sentiments of Councillor Lamb and Councillor Hodgson. That it's not ideal, but it makes sense. But I do like Councillor Sargent's suggestion that if we're going to do this temporarily, in that time we look at what we can do with that footpath, because it's a big old footpath. It's just going to stop. And if there is a way that in the future that can be made safe as a bridge, I would support that moving forward. The second thing, and it's probably a little bit trivial, I understand Warwick's done a good report here, but I question whether people's sexuality, gender, race, religion has any bearing on their attitude to the Cayes crossing. I don't really see the point of that, I'm afraid.
Through you, Chair. So just on that, so when we do consultation, we have to record all protected characteristics as a council for equal ops. So that's why we're asking those questions. As you say, and then I've, through the equality impact assessment, picked out the relevant ones to the report. But thank you.
Thank you. I'll take Councillor Prochaska as the last speaker on this item.
I mean, I must admit that I use a similar crossing just outside of the city, and I'm not sure whether Malvern Hills is going through the same process. It's off the main Hereford Road and sort of going towards Bransford. I can see issues raised by my colleague Councillor Lawrenson in terms of restricting public access. So I'm quite nervous about sort of putting those barriers and introducing the measures. Just a quick point on going through the impact assessments for Councillor Cleary's benefit. Equality Act is still the land of law in this country. Thank you.
Councillor Ali, I'll take this final.
My suggestion that if we can reduce the duration from 3 years to 1 year, and in meantime, if we consider any safety, measurements that we can do something about, because fatalities and issues are very, the rate is very low. But I really appreciate that we are talking about public safety. Public safety is important, but it's something that we can't permanently remove. We can't close permanent. So instead of next 3 years, we will be in the same situation. Why can't we put it for 1 year and find other solutions, like colleagues said, bridge or something else?
Okay, I don't think we can change it to 1 year, personally, and I mean the other issue is always going to be about the amount of effort and sort of effort in trying to reproduce this report is a significant piece of work. I'll probably expect it takes a year to produce one of these reports, right? Yes.
Yeah, there's a series of reports to get to this stage, yeah, absolutely.
You want to come back? Are you all right? Okay. Well, carry forward the recommendations then, I think. I mean, there's clearly a divide in terms of restricting access, but I think the overriding factor is around safety. And would you have it on your conscience, if a fatality did occur? I don't think some of the issues Councillor Lawrenson was talking about can be complicated into this scenario. This is a genuine, safety issue, not only for the people crossing it, but train drivers and the passengers that are riding those trains, which sometimes are in the absolute hundreds. And if, God forbid, if our decision here was to result in something awful happening there, I mean, I don't think any of us could live with it. So I'll take the recommendations point. 1.1, note the contents of the report, and in particular the outcome of the public consultation exercise undertaken in respect of the draft public space protection orders attached at Appendix 5 and Appendix 6. All those in favour? Thank you. 1.2, approve the implementation of the public spaces protection order at Appendix 5 that will close to pedestrians footpath WR858 Brickfields Crossing for a maximum period of 3 years. All those in favour? All those against? And all those abstention? That's 2 against and 1 abstention. 1.3, approve the implementation of a public spaces protection order at Appendix 6 that will close to pedestrians footpath WR678 Cayes Crossing for a maximum period of 3 years. All those in favour? All those against? Any abstentions? That's 3 against, it's carried. Thank you, that's been carried. Shane, last but not least, we have the performance report.
By no means least, thank you, Chair. This is the final report for Q4 for the committee for the 21-22 year. And of the various projects, 2 are showing as red, and these were both transferred during the year to the Health and Wellbeing Committee. So, in fact, I'm pleased to report that all of the projects for the agenda for this committee for this year were completed. So that's a very good result. There are a couple of performance indicators which are still showing red. In respect of community grants awarded, that was because one of the 4 reports was put back for a little bit of extra information, so we should get that one. And then there are a couple of other areas where there's been good in progress but haven't quite met the target for the year. But generally, there are good responses, detailed information on each of those. So if members have any questions, colleagues would be more than happy to answer them. Thank you.
Okay, I'll open that report to the floor. Councillor Hodgson.
Yeah, just one. Hold on a minute, I tapped the wrong button there.
Now it's on. It's on now.
I know it is. Yes, just a couple of points. Yeah, the community recovery strategy and the child poverty task and finish group. I noticed they've now moved over to the Health and Wellbeing Committee, which I'm now the vice chairman of, and I'm sure there's members in this room who are also members of that committee. When are we likely to see these to that particular committee?
So we will be discussing those reports with you tomorrow, Councillor Hodgson, at the CAP meeting, and they are due at your committee a week on Monday.
Do we have any other speakers on this item? No? We're all exhausted. Thank you. So we'll take this to report. To note. So all those in favour of noting these as in recommendation 1.1. Agreed. Thank you. I haven't been identified any other items of business, so I can officially close this meeting. Thank you very much for all your participation. Thank you.